The Hollywood executives arrived in Paris on October 3, 1962. Three men in expensive suits, carrying leather briefcases containing contracts that could change Brigitte Bardot's life forever. They'd flown first class from Los Angeles, stayed at the Ritz, and scheduled a meeting at Brigitte's apartment for 2 p.m. The offer was unprecedented. Historic. The kind of deal that happens once in a generation. 10 films over 5 years. Complete creative control. Her choice of directors, co-stars, scripts, a percentage of box office profits, endorsement deals, merchandising rights. The total package, if all films succeeded, was estimated at $500 million in 1962 dollars, equivalent to roughly $5 billion today. Brigitte listened to the pitch for 45 minutes. The executives were confident, enthusiastic, painting a vision of her as the biggest star in Hollywood history. Bigger than Monroe. Bigger than anyone. When they finished, she asked one question. How much time would I have off between films? We'd structure it so you'd have 6 weeks between each production. Very generous. She did the math silently. 5 years, 10 films, 6 weeks between each. So essentially, I'd be working constantly for 5 years. You'd be creating art, one executive corrected, at the highest level, with unlimited resources. Brigitte smiled politely. May I have a day to consider? They left confident she'd say yes. How could she not? This was everything any actress could dream of. That evening, Brigitte sat alone in her apartment, the contract on her coffee table. She didn't read it immediately. Instead, she walked to her window and looked out at Paris, the city she loved, the life she'd built, the person she was trying to become. Then she read the contract. All 47 pages. The money was staggering. The prestige was undeniable. The opportunity was once in a lifetime. But buried in the legal language were other terms. Mandatory attendance at all promotional events. Worldwide press tours. Photo shoots on demand. 24-hour availability for studio publicity needs. Exclusive representation. Meaning she couldn't do any other work. No French films, no independent projects, without studio approval. Image control. The studio would have final say over her public persona, her relationships, even her personal appearance. It wasn't a film contract. It was a contract for her entire existence. 5 years of her life, completely controlled, in exchange for $500 million and global superstardom. Brigitte closed the contract and made her decision. The next morning, she called the executive's hotel. I've made my decision. I'm declining your offer. Silence on the other end. Then, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that? I'm saying no. Thank you for the opportunity. But no, Miss Bardot. I don't think you understand what you're turning down. I understand perfectly. You're offering me money and fame in exchange for my life. And I've already learned that's a bad deal. The executive tried another approach. We can negotiate. If you want more money, it's not about money. Then what? Tell us what you need, and we'll make it happen. She paused. I need to be able to wake up in the morning without a schedule. I need to be able to say no without consequences. I need to own my own life. Can you put that in the contract? Miss Bardot, that's not how this works. I know. That's why I'm saying no. She hung up. The Hollywood executives didn't believe her at first. They assumed she was negotiating, playing hard to get, waiting for them to sweeten the deal. They came back with a revised offer, $600 million, shorter contracts, more time off. Brigitte declined again. They tried a third time, $750 million, only 8 films instead of 10. Final offer. She said no. By the 4th rejection, they finally understood. She wasn't negotiating. She genuinely didn't want it. The head of the studio flew to Paris personally to ask her one question. Why? Brigitte's answer was simple. Because I'd been owned before, and I'll never let anyone own me again. The decision shocked everyone in Brigitte's life. Her agent was furious. Do you understand what you just turned down? You'd be set for life. Your children's children would be set for life. I don't have children, Brigitte pointed out. And being set for life financially, while giving up my actual life, doesn't seem like a good trade. Her publicist tried to reason with her. Think of the legacy. You'd be remembered forever. I'm already remembered. What I want is to be present, to actually live my life instead of performing it. Even friends thought she was making a mistake. You're at the peak of your career. This is your moment. Maybe that's exactly why I need to walk away, Brigitte replied. Before the peak becomes a prison. The media response was brutal. French newspapers ran headlines. Bardot turns down Hollywood fortune. Career suicide. From goddess to recluse. American tabloids were crueler. Brigitte's breakdown. Star rejects $500 million. Has fame driven Bardot insane? Industry insiders gave quotes expressing confusion, disappointment, concern. One producer told Variety, "She's throwing away an opportunity most actresses would kill for. I don't understand it. Nobody understands it." But Brigitte understood it perfectly. That was all that mattered. The decision had been building for years. In 1959, Brigitte had signed a 3-film contract that had nearly destroyed her. The schedule was brutal, the demands dehumanizing, the lack of control suffocating. She'd learned that money couldn't compensate for losing yourself. That success measured in dollars wasn't success if it cost you your sanity. The Hollywood offer was that contract multiplied by 10. More money, yes, but also more control, more demands, more ownership of her body, her time, her existence. She'd spent the last 3 years trying to reclaim herself from the industry that had consumed her. This contract would undo all that progress. $500 million wasn't worth going back into the cage, even a gilded cage. But there was another reason Brigitte said no, one she rarely talked about publicly. A week before the Hollywood executives arrived, she'd visited an animal shelter outside Paris. She'd spent the afternoon with abandoned dogs, creatures that had been used, discarded, traumatized by humans who'd claimed to love them. One dog in particular stayed with her, a German shepherd who'd been starved and beaten by his previous owner. He wouldn't let anyone touch him, cowered in the corner of his kennel, eyes full of terror and mistrust. Brigitte sat outside his kennel for 2 hours, not trying to touch him, just being present. Eventually the dog approached. Tentatively, carefully, testing whether this human was safe, and Brigitte realized she was that dog, beaten down by an industry that claimed to love her while destroying her, learning slowly, carefully, to trust herself again. The Hollywood contract was someone offering to adopt her, with all the same promises of love and care that had come before. She'd learned better. The first year after rejecting the contract was the hardest. Brigitte had no major projects, no income compared to what she could have had. People in the industry stopped calling. If she'd turned down that opportunity, clearly she was unreliable. There were moments of doubt, late nights when she'd calculate what $500 million could have bought: security, comfort, never having to worry about money again. But then she'd remember what it would have cost, and the doubt would fade. A diary entry from November 1962. People think I'm crazy for turning down the Hollywood deal. Maybe I am, but I'd rather be crazy and free than sane and owned. I spent 10 years being owned. I won't do it again, not for any amount of money. The conviction was absolute. No regrets, only relief. Instead of Hollywood blockbusters, Brigitte did something radical. She took a year off. Completely off. No films, no photo shoots, no interviews, no performances. She rented a small cottage in the French countryside and she gardened, read books, took long walks, adopted more rescue animals, slept without sleeping pills for the first time in years. She learned how to be a person instead of a product. That year cost me millions in lost income, she later said, but it bought me back my life. Best investment I ever made. While Hollywood made billions without her, Brigitte made herself whole, the better deal. The executives never really understood her decision. In 1964, the studio head who'd made the offer gave an interview. I still don't get it. We offered her everything, and she walked away. It's the biggest mistake I've ever seen an actress make. But he was measuring success in dollars, in box office numbers, in fame and legacy. Brigitte was measuring success differently, in mornings without panic attacks, in days where she owned her own time, in the ability to say no without consequences. By his metrics, she'd failed. By hers, she'd finally won. The role Brigitte rejected went to another actress. The films were made. They were successful. The actress became extremely wealthy and famous. She also, according to later interviews, spent those 5 years exhausted, controlled, and creatively stifled. The contract was everything promised, and everything Brigitte had feared. It made me rich, the actress said in a 1970 interview, but it took 5 years of my life. I'll never get back. I was so controlled, so scheduled, so owned. I had money, but I had no freedom. I'm not sure it was worth it. Brigitte read that interview and underlined one sentence in her personal copy. I had money, but I had no freedom. She'd chosen freedom, and it had been the right choice. By the 1970s, the narrative around Brigitte's decision began to shift. The counterculture movement was questioning material success. Young people were rejecting traditional markers of achievement in favor of authenticity and freedom. Suddenly, Brigitte wasn't crazy for turning down Hollywood. She was ahead of her time. A 1971 article in a progressive magazine, Brigitte Bardot rejected billions to reclaim herself. While her peers sold their souls for stardom, she chose dignity. History will remember her courage. The culture had caught up to her decision, but she hadn't made it for the culture. She'd made it for herself. In 1989, a journalist asked Brigitte the question everyone wanted answered. Do you regret turning down the Hollywood contract? Her response was immediate. Not for a single second. Not even a flicker of regret. But you could have been one of the wealthiest actresses in history. I could have been a lot of things. I could have been dead. I could have been permanently broken. I could have spent 5 more years being controlled and consumed. The money doesn't matter when you're too destroyed to enjoy it. What if you'd said yes? How would your life be different? She thought for a moment. I'd have more money, less peace, more fame, less self, more things, less life. It's not a trade I'm interested in. So what did you gain by saying no? Everything that matters. Time, freedom, the ability to look in the mirror and recognize myself, the chance to figure out who I am when I'm not performing. Money can't buy that. The decision had ripple effects Brigitte never anticipated. Young actresses who heard her story started questioning their own contracts, started saying no to deals that would make them rich but destroy them. Industry standards slowly began to shift. Conversations about work-life balance, discussions about artistic control versus financial compensation. Brigitte's no became a reference point, proof that walking away was possible. One actress who rejected a major contract in 1975 said, I thought of Brigitte Bardot. She turned down $500 million and survived. If she could do it, so could I. But the most profound impact was on Brigitte herself. Saying no to Hollywood, to that much money, that much prestige, that much temptation, proved to her that she was finally free. For years, she'd been controlled by others, then controlled by fear, then controlled by obligation and expectation. The Hollywood contract was the ultimate test. That's when I knew I'd really escaped, she said in a 2001 interview, because they offered me everything I'd once thought I wanted, and I didn't want it anymore. I wanted something they couldn't offer. My own life, on my own terms. The billions were bait. She didn't bite. That was freedom. In her final years, Brigitte lived simply. Her home was modest, her lifestyle unpretentious. She had money, residuals from her films, wise investments, but nothing compared to what the Hollywood deal would have generated. A visitor to her home in 2008 noted she lives like a normal person. No staff, no luxury, just her and her animals in a comfortable house. You'd never know she was once the most famous woman in the world. Brigitte's response when told this: "Good. That means I succeeded. I wanted to be a person, not an icon. Turns out you can't be both." The journalist who'd asked about the Hollywood contract in 1989 returned in 2004 for a follow-up. 42 years later, knowing everything that's happened, would you make the same choice? Brigitte didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Without question. That decision saved my life. How? Because saying no to that contract meant saying yes to myself. It was the first time I chose my well-being over everyone else's expectations. And once you do that once, it gets easier to keep doing it. What would you say to people facing similar choices? Money versus freedom. She leaned forward. Serious. I'd say that freedom is worth more than any amount of money. That owning your own life is the only real wealth. That you can always make more money, but you can't make more life. And I'd say that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no to something everyone says you should want. Brigitte Bardot rejected a role that would have made her billions. She never regretted it. Not when the money would have been nice, not when people called her crazy, not when the actress who took the deal became even more famous. Because Brigitte had learned something most people never do, that you can't buy your way out of a cage if you're the one locking yourself inside. The Hollywood contract wasn't an opportunity. It was a test. Would she trade herself for comfort? Would she sell her freedom for security? Would she choose billions over her own life? She chose herself, chose freedom, chose life. And 50 years later, living in her modest home, surrounded by rescue animals and hard-won peace, she could honestly say it was the best decision she'd ever made. The billions would have made her richer. Saying no made her whole, and no amount of money could ever be worth more than that.